Walter, and let me add my welcome to yours to everyone who's with us today. We have a sizable group of participants from some 13 or 14 countries, which tells us that interest in contemporary anti-Semitism remains high, and for good reason. We did 12 webinars over the last several months. Those are all available for those of you who would like to look at the tapes. We have 8 more scheduled for this winter and spring, and Dr. Selinsky will begin that series in just a moment. His talk is going to concentrate on anti-Semitism and today's Iran. He's written extensively on this subject. Mark Selinsky did his studies at the University of Southern California and then Oxford University before taking a PhD from Tulane University. He is a very active scholar. He published a book on the Taliban in 2014 with Prager, followed it up with a book on jihad in the West, published, I'm proud to say, with Indiana University Press. In July, Nebraska will bring out a book entitled Empire of Terror, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And on top of that, he's just finished still another new manuscript entitled Iran Against the Jews, the Islamic Republic's Declared War. Today's talk is going to offer us some insight into the kinds of concerns he deals with in that book. Mark, without any further ado, let me hand over to you with great pleasure.
Thank you, and what an honor it is to be able to be here to talk with this august organization. Let me, if I may, put the slides, if I have it. Let's see. Okay. Can everybody see that? That's just wonderful. And I do this. There are 2 things I would like to I must say that I speak only for myself and not as an intelligence analyst or a member of the Department of Defense. And then the second thing that's important is a thank to you for taking your time to listen. I hope you'll find your time well spent. Talk a little bit about the strategies. Now, many of you have heard about the cartoon contests that got a lot of attention. There's also conferences. I'm going to talk for about 5 tactics that Iran uses to defame Jews. We'll also talk about 6 themes that they have and how they overlap. It's really hard to isolate the reason for the defamation. The evidence is abundant and you've come across it, you've seen it. Some of it seems very strange, particularly when you had the very pugnacious Mahmoud Ahmadinejad a few years ago. Part of it, I would say, is to divert attention from the failings. Many regimes do that. That's not unusual. Iran also wants to compete against Saudi Arabia and other Sunni nations for the hearts and minds and attentions in the Muslim world. Part of a way to inculcate generations in themes of the enemy, the other. But I put it to you that at its core is a deep hatred of Jews that was brought over by Khomeini and now is passed down to successive generations. They say that if you make an argument ad Hitlerum, you've lost the argument. And that's simply dragging in Adolf Hitler because you've run out of important or intelligence things to say to defend your argument. And it becomes a reductio ad absurdum. Well, I'm going to make pretty much of a case that in many ways, the hatred that Iranian leadership has towards the Jews is comparable to that of Nazi Germany and that era. Defamation is just one type of warfare. Men and women combat with arms and ships and planes and guns. There are also diplomatic efforts. There's also economic sanctions, BDS. Iran is now, as you know, building nuclear capabilities. A type of warfare is information warfare. And Iran is directing many of these not only against Israel, but against world Jewry. From the very beginning of the Islamic Republic, the leadership took it seriously. Information operations, propaganda, the media, print is right in the Constitution. And Ayatollah Khomeini knew when he was in Paris the importance of words. After all, he's a preacher. He got his very sizable following, and he found out that when giving his views on cassettes and spreading them around Iran in his absence, he could get the message out. So he placed from the very beginning a premium on this. Today, Iran continues to use the word and to propagate its image around the world and to defame the Jews in Israel and the United States with it. Press TV is well known to many observers, particularly in the English-speaking world. Now, they produce it in a number of languages, but a tactic that Iran uses and that other propagandists use would be to first you blend the truth with falsehoods, and then sometimes there's just a complete falsehood. Blending the truth. So you have prominent Jews, Edelstein, said, yes, I'm concerned about an American policy towards Israel. This is spun and defamed and made very plastic into a dual loyalty, very common in Israel. They are Jews living in the United States, but not part of it. Their real loyalty would be to international Jewry and to Israel. Nigel Farage made a comment that, well, yes, Jews do have a voice in American politics, and these words are taken and spun into really a defamation. They're saying that Jews control the United States. He said no such thing. There are other themes that are taken, modernized, and propagated. One of these are the body parts. Now, I know that we have some Soviets out there, or some former Soviets out there. This was very common Soviet defamation in the 1980s when they blamed the United States for taking body parts of Africans, and it took off there. I don't know about you, but I have a license, and that says that my organs can be donated to somebody if it looks like I'm going to die, and you may have them too. So you take a kernel of truth, and what you do is then say, it is Israel and the Jews that go around harvesting body parts and selling them for profit on the international market. Is there a strong kernel of truth? Well, we Western nations that have the technology will move body parts if somebody is going to die. And when these ideas take root, they continue to be recirculated. Well, you know, in Islam, there's the house of war and there's the house of peace. There's also the house of cartoon in Iran, and it came up in 96. It was a way, I don't think a lot of time or money was placed into it. They did not know that the international attention the cartoons would get until years later. These are the cartoons that shook the world. And if you remember, this came from Denmark. If you'll see on the slide some of the offending cartoons, the Danes did not or could not have known how offensive they would be. The backstory very quickly is that they were looking for cartoonists to illustrate a book for children on the life of Muhammad. It was not intended to be sarcastic. It was intended to be respectful, as you would have cartoons of Moses or of Jesus. Well, it set off international riots and literally deaths, boycotts, flying heads, and it made a lot of news. Now, Iran determined that it would respond by having a cartoon contest of its own. But this was going to be a cartoon contest on the Holocaust. Now, immediately you may say there's something asymmetric about this. Wouldn't you have a cartoon contest on Moses? Wouldn't you have one maybe on Jesus? There's nothing funny about the crucifixion, but you could defame him some way. So why would they have one on the Holocaust? And Mahmoud Ahmadinejad said very clearly, because this is the one thing that you Westerners hold more sacred than anything else, is the Holocaust. You're not allowed to criticize it. You're not allowed to to contest it. It is holy to you. And therefore, we are having a contest. And you can see here the winning entrant, and this was a fellow from Morocco. The Jewish crane puts up the burial wall on which is a photograph of Auschwitz protecting, I assume, would be the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Okay, but as with some of the cartoons, the humor or the punchline is not very apparent to me. Now, not to be outdone, Comics in Tel Aviv said, well, we will have our contest of our own. And this is going to be a contest to have the most offensive anti-Semitic cartoon in the world. Insult schminsult. And you can see here you have a fiddler not on the roof, but standing on the Brooklyn Bridge as the World Trade Center is collapsing. Now, there are contests and there are conferences. Contests became popular after the world attention given to the 2006 contest. Conferences took off too. It doesn't take a lot of money. Sometimes they may fly the people over, but it's a way to gather international attention. Now, this was one of the, there were a few before this too, the World Without Zionism, what have you. This brought a lot of Holocaust deniers from around the world. It's really an eclectic mix of garden variety Jew haters, BDS, the left participants. This is the Hollywood-ism, and you'll see that that Latin suffix ism, Trumpism, Zionism, and they will attack that with a number of themes. Now, for many of the conferences, they will be called this ism or that ism, but the panelists and the speakers will bring about talks about, let's say, Mossad's role in the 9/11. On this one, you don't. It's not apparent what this has to do with Hollywood, unless they're dragging Steven Spielberg in somehow. I don't know. But really, the conferences are just means to bring in insults of Jews and Israel and the United States. I need to tell you that for many in the Iranian leadership, the intellectuals, Israel, world Jewry, and America are so interlocked, it's really hard to separate one from the other. When Hitler talked about Judeo-Bolshevism, the two were at times almost one and the same for him. Here you see a fella you may know, Dieudonné Mbala. He is a comedian of sorts and an activist, French Cameroonian activist in France, and he does have a following. What you are seeing here is an inverted Sig Heil, and it's an inside joke. They call it the Quenelle. Much of his comedy is mocking the Holocaust, mocking Jews, and also mocking prominent Jewish intellectuals who attack him and who attack anti-Semitism. So we've gone, the first contest, was in 2001. This is the contest. You can see that in 2016, the quality of the art has improved. Maybe Zion from France, the first place winner, went to art school. Themes: money, 6 million, and Auschwitz perched on top. That was number one. Let's go to third place here, because sometimes you have to struggle to find the intended humor here. But you'll see the tongues coming out before the Holocaust Memorial Museum. I can only assume this, that you're not allowed to talk about the truth inside when talking about the Holocaust, which is a very common theme. Here you see something where it's very difficult, for me at least, to understand what was funny by this defamation. Here you have stereotypic Jews with the beak nose, the large bulbous nose, Holocaust, some kind of bread. Jews and knives, too, are very common, and they're feeding tea to a dog. What could it be? Special mention. Maybe that the Holocaust is the bread of the Jews. Your guess is as good as mine. But take a look at the other, the special mention. And you have the Grim Reaper as the Holocaust taking a selfie. Here, it's almost self-defeating because Hitler is part of the three. I assume the one behind is al-Baghdadi. And the whole theme is that the Holocaust never existed. We're going to go into the tactics here. You don't have to read that. I'll go over point by point. But here you have Israel and the United States. The two are one and the same. And let's take a look here. You have the pictures of Netanyahu, but also President Obama. There was a theme that when President Obama, he was himself a man of color, would reach out. I put it to you that that did not temper the anti-Semitism or the anti-Americanism very much. Of all the tactics I would bring to your attention, I think this is the one that, in my view, has not been covered enough. And is very important and will grow in effect and importance, and that is intersectionality. Notice Palestine is not alone, okay? And you have the different colored hands. For a number of reasons, this has to do with the long march into the institutions, but it is a partnership with people of color against Israel, seen as a colonial power, and Jews as seen as white people, white oppressive people. The green-red axis is sometimes called, and you may be very well aware of it. Some of them are not, some of the themes are not pro-Iran, in the same way that many liberals in the United States were not pro-Stalin, but they were anti-anti. All this, once again, would be themes for entire chapters and books. Here's an example. Yet another contest. This is the I Can't Breathe, all right? You will see an individual, the black, I guess that's Floyd. The Hakenkreuz represents either the Milwaukee Police Department or police or white people or the United States. And look underneath that. You have a dove being choked by a Star of David, the dove of peace. Many of those who are anti-regime make their case in the context of being pro-peace. Others will say you have to be very sensitive to Muslims around the world. They are the new Jews because they are suffering from discrimination in the United States and in Europe. You know, when something works, you want to go with it. So if you have a theme or if you have a graphic, you'll see it recycled. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was circulated in Henry Ford's Dearborn Independent. You'll see this, the International Jew. He had to stop that over a lawsuit. I do not read Persian. I think I'm told that this says the Holocaust, the greatest lie, but it's the same graphic. You could take a look at this and say to yourself, wait a minute, I've seen this before. I've seen this graphic. Indeed, you have. This was a graphic for an exhibit Goebbels put on in 37-38, The Eternal Jew, made by Fritz Hippler in 1940. So it gets a lot of mileage. It could be that some of the Iranians were too intellectually or artistically lazy to come up with their own theme. I don't think it's that. I think that you recirculate things again and again, and they begin to get traction. Tactic is just attack, attack, attack. And it's not only their tactic at all or their strategy. The critical theory, you all know about the Frankfurt School and the inside joke there. What is the critical theory? It is to criticize. You attack the West, you attack Hindenburg at the time, you attack this and that, and keep going. And some of the attacks can become, by our standard, I think, ludicrous. I think my favorite is this. that why are there droughts in Iran? All right. You have scientists come will say because the Israelis stole the clouds. They would actually say this, they would debate this. Now, when they debate these things, they might have two or three people on a panel. You will have the person making it, the scientist. Then you will have some people agreeing, nod, yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And then you will have somebody challenging it, but is finally won over. So the idea was, well, there are more clouds in Israel now. There are fewer clouds in Iran, and the Israelis are very terrible people. They lassoed these clouds to pull over and rain on Israeli crops. Now, in this case, one of the panelists said, listen, I'm a scientist. This is ridiculous. And when you say things like that, you just make Iranians look stupid. That was a lot of fun. That doesn't happen a lot. That was off script. Some people you know here. What gives good cover would be anti-Israel eliminationist Jews. I'm not talking about people who criticize Israel. Israel's a democracy. Some people like it, some people don't. I am talking about people who, as a career, talk about Israel being uniquely evil and among all states, the only one that has no right to live. You know, Chomsky, I don't know if you could see Medea Benjamin there of Code Pink, the very husky fella, has all sorts of degrees in karate, Miko Peled, and he's popular too because he gets to give the elimination of Israel from the point of a commando, which he was. And there in the bottom right-hand corner, sitting before the Iranian flag, is Norman Finkelstein, who is called the most popular Jew in the history of anti-Semitism. Once again, every one of these people you could write an article about. Here you have Jews going over there under, I don't know if they're all Jews, but certainly Ariel Gold, the woman holding that shalom peace, a constant theme. At least the Iranian regime, all they want is peace. Gunter Grass said that too. And it's interesting too. I wonder how many feminists ever refuse to wear the head covering, because men don't have to wear that. The only feminist I know who made an issue of it was in the early 80s, Oriana Fallaci, a glamorous, gorgeous, intelligent Italian intellectual, was speaking to Khomeini and said, I've refused to wear this medieval rag, threw it on the ground and walked out. You don't have anything like that. The think tanks are many, as we have many in the United States, and their definitions, but we know what a think tank is generally. There you would have the large mosques and the universities. We have think tanks in here, the great Indiana University has a think tank of sorts with anti-Semitism. But look at this man. I want to stress one thing here. He is purveying anti-Semitism from the point of view of a cleric. You see the Star of David behind them. This is a 6-part lecture series, Knowing the Enemy, the Jews as an Introduction to Knowing Zionism. The real enemy would be the Jews. And the significance here is the prestige he has, the funding that he has, and also that he attacks Jews here through the Quran and through the Hadiths and through the sacred literature. So Jews are condemned and evil and wicked and satanic by the voice of God. The other one would be Hassan Abbasi. They call him at the Doctrinal Institute the Kissinger of Iran. And this is funny to me because Kissinger was despised by the regime. He was seen as a friend of the Shah. It reminds me too of Tariq Ramadan, if you go before he got into trouble and in prison. But about 15 to 20 years ago, he was the kind of it boy of Islam in Europe. And they called him the Martin Luther of Islam. He was going to reform. But after Martin Luther in Europe, you had the wars of religion and millions of deaths. So I don't know what was meant by that. I want to go into some of the anti-Semitic themes. Here you could see the difficulty in humor is apparent here. This little green M&M with the arms is dancing on a hat with the Star of David, being illuminated by Uncle Sam, casting its image on the world. All right, I guess that's what it's doing. And you have an angry hijabi with a needle. But here again, the connection between Anti-Americanism and anti-Semitism is very, very, very tight. World rule is, as you could imagine, a theme as popular in Iran as it was in Europe and as it still is among some, and in the United States, the David Duke kind of thing. Here you see not an Iranian movie, it's about the Rothschilds, but a German one. Once again, the importation of themes. Now, in anti-Semitism, Rothschilds, I would put it to you, are pretty passe. You don't hear they're kind of a lesser billionaire group. In Iran, though, because they have used it so often, they hold on to it and they pass it on generationally. It is an anti-Semitic trope that works. Same thing with Freemasons being connected to Jews. I don't know if Freemasonry is much of an issue. It was in 19th and 20th century Europe. The big focus was Jared Kushner. Once again, who controlled Trump? Jared Kushner and the Jewish conspiracy. Blood libel goes back, you know, to William, and it continued along, and there have been many, many books written about that. There were some cases in Shiraz. Perhaps most famously, in the 20th century, in the great novels, The Fixer was about Mendel Bayless in Kiev. I recommend that book to you if you haven't read it. You have different spins on this too. So first of all, you do have simply mixing in blood for matzah, very common in Iran today. The other is the body parts we talked about. Now, Zara's Blue Eyes was a series pitched to a young adolescent and pre-adolescent audience. Zara was a Palestinian whose eyes were plucked out by Jews and sold on the international market. But a woman said, with whom I corresponded, said, I'll never forget that because I was just a girl in Iran and she was not Jewish, this woman. And I thought to myself, how cruel these Jews are to do something like this. Vitally important. I think it was the Jesuits who said, give me your son until he is 7 years old and I will return to you the man he will become. Well, if you can get children and fill their hearts with hatred at a young age, it's hard to get it out. And this is why I think it's more than just defamation of Jews, it's child abuse. Saturday Hunter is the same theme here. This is a famous actor shepherding a gullible Palestinian boy, and well, I think you can finish the sentence. So we have Bibi Netanyahu as a bloodsucker, but overlaid on this theme of blood libel with the Palestinians would be Jews, Netanyahu as something devilish, vampirish, less than human. Very common theme in Nazi graphics and literature and history, and a common theme now in Iran. Well, many of you have celebrated Purim, and that doesn't look like any Purim party I ever attended. It is a Purim party where they're drenched in blood. I don't think in the history of Passover there has been any Jew has ever mixed blood into anything. Here you have overlapping themes. You have the devil, you have the blood dripping down, and you have the Hakenkreuz inside the Star of David. Jinns is a kind of devil in Muslim literature, and they decide, are Jews really jinns or devils? Very clever on the left here, as you can see, got it, Jews as cobras. The other joke I simply don't get, it's a headache. Now, sometimes the themes don't really work being brought over. This is a Judensau, and the Judensau is a medieval German tale about Jews being nursed from a pig, a woman pig. They bring it over to Fars, and that does not look like a pig to me. It looks more like a Labrador retriever or something. Holocaust is as important as anybody. They have almost a religion about it. They see it as sophisticated. But once again, when you defame somebody, it becomes overly complicated. Here you see a spoof inside of a satire, inside of a parody. I don't want to get into it. It's Elie Wiesel pretending to be a Holocaust denier, Robert Florissant, not saying all is forgiven, but saying all is revised on a spin of Charlie Hebdo. It's just more of a headache than a cartoon. This becomes clear, as you can see. The new Nazi is the Jew. Three themes. The Holocaust never happened. The Holocaust happened, yeah, there are a lot of Jews died, but no more so than others, because look at the firebombing of Dresden and Larson, and I cannot find, despite my efforts, any firebombing of a city named Larson, or it didn't happen enough. One of the leaders, Kayan, he was a former prison interrogator, for a long time editor, publisher at Kayan, a very large newspaper. The real Holocaust was the Jewish murder of Christians. We know that the theme 5 is control of culture, the snake cobra being a Jew and Muslims fighting against it. Jews use culture to control for their money, for their ideas, and now through intersectionality to exploit blacks. After all, Amos and Andy were created by the blacks. At the very core, the worst it would be Israel. Israel is a collective Jew. Israel is not only evil, Israel is not only the most evil state, Israel is uniquely evil and is the only state that cannot exist. To my mind, Iran is the only country that has as a central foreign policy goal the elimination of another state. It's celebrated in Al-Quds Day, started by Khomeini, the 6th, the last Friday of, it doesn't matter. It just comes, and every year, and they project their influence around the world. In Europe, too, there's debates whether they could participate in it or not. So this is what I want to leave you with. If there's a bottom line, I'd want to leave you with this, that when you think of Iranian anti-Semitism, I do ask that you think of it as homicidal anti-Semitism. Right, they had, in 48, there may have been 100,000, many voluntarily left to Israel, but by the time of the revolution, 30,000, there may be at max, I would say 8,000 left. They are a pitiable lot, I think. They live in fear. No, they have not been killed. I think it's very naive to think that they don't worry about being killed, but that's the story of another briefing. So, okay, this is my email. I would ask only one thing of you. If you have any comments, anything certainly if you think I'm wrong at any point, because I am writing a book now, and I value the opinions of all of you. I can promise you one thing, that if you write me, I will respond. And this is just a naked plug for a book that's coming out in July. This is about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The one I'm working on now would be Iran against the Jews. And I thank you very, very much. And what could I say? This has just been a delight and a privilege for me to speak here. I'm going to turn this over to Gunther now.